Hello everybody and welcome back to another Borderlands 3 video, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Borderlands 3's mechanics and how things function within the game. As you all know, I'm a very technical person and I like seeing how things work and what makes them break. As we have seen with Borderlands 2, once you get into it, you can really start messing around with some stuff. But I want to go ahead and make these videos, and hey, if you enjoy the technical side of things, do me a favor and hit the like button. And because there's no segue into this, hey, if you end up pre-ordering Borderlands 3 on PC, be sure to use creator code rooSpy because they're offering 20% to the creator, and that's cool. Thanks. Anyway, let's get in with the video. Okay, so to get started, let's go ahead and jump into kinetic damage. Now, kinetic damage is basically white damage, any form of non-elemental damage. This includes non-elemental grenades. This includes any kind of explosive that doesn't have an element attached to it, as Torg no longer produces straight up explosive in terms of the element. Explosive as an element is now completely removed. It is now considered kinetic damage, or if it has an element attached to it, it's that element. So explosive is gone and is now kinetic. And as far as any non-elemental melee attacks, will also be considered kinetic damage. Now, for the bonuses and negatives to this, flesh and shields, there is absolutely no positive, but also no negative. That means that you won't have any issues tearing through flesh and shields, which is going to be the majority of your beginner playthrough, which obviously there are no elements anyway, so you're going to be able to use this. Now, if you're going up against armor, in TVHM and normal mode, you'll be suffering a flat 20% damage reduction when trying to use kinetic damage. However, obviously it is armor, so you will be able to corrode that. So let's go ahead and jump into corrosion. Now, corrosion is obviously a little bit different. It's going to have a pretty sizable bonus against armor this time around. For armor, you're going to get a flat 50% extra damage when going up against armor. You're not going to fall. You're not going to have that, 20% reduction. And in TVHM mode, you're going to have 75% extra damage. So if you know you're going through a lot of armor targets, you're going to want to focus on using corrosive weaponry. Now, let's get into the downsides of using corrosive weapons. Now, in normal mode, you're going to be suffering a little bit of a damage reduction when you try and use corrosive against basically anything else. So if you try and use corrosive against flesh, you're going to be suffering 20% reduction, or in TVHM, 35%. So this isn't an element that you can just use on literally everything. You need to focus on saving it for actual armored enemies. And for bosses, you'll be able to actually see whether or not they are armored and things like that. So it's very important to keep an eye on that, because once you get into things like mayhem mode, it's going to be very imperative that you're using the correct element. And shields are playing a much bigger role this time around. Shields are no longer these flimsy things that die in one hit for yourself and for enemies. So you are going to have a greater focus on actually using shock. That's why for corrosive against shields, you're seeing 30% reduction. And in TVHM, you're going to see a flat 50% reduction. That means you are going to do literally half the damage of going up against a shield with a corrosive weapon. So you have to be very careful with your loadout. You can't just stick to one element. Speaking of sticking to one element, let's go ahead and jump into shock. Now, shock in Borderlands 2 was basically the go-to element. Everybody used shock for basically everything because it worked on everything. That is no longer the case inside of Borderlands 2. Since shields are such a huge pivotal thing for both normal TVHM and mayhem mode, shock now does 100% extra damage against shields, or in TVHM 150%. However, if you try and use shock against armor or flesh, you're going to be suffering a bit of a damage down. You're going to have 20% in normal mode and 35% in TVHM for both flesh and armor when trying to use shock. This is a big change to how we end up making our builds, because of the fact that, well, we like we said, we basically used it on everything, and you can't do that anymore. Now let's go ahead and go over the last regular element, which is fire. As you all know, fire against flesh will do a lot of damage, giving you 50% extra damage against flesh enemies, or 75% in TVHM. However, if you are going to be in If you're going to be using it against shields or armor, you're going to be suffering 30% damage for both shield and armor, and a solid 50% damage reduction against shields and armor in TVHM. So in the higher difficulty, you will need to be paying way more attention, because fire is going to be doing jack shit to shields. Now, what about the new elements? What about cryo and radiation? Let's go ahead and go over radiation. Radiation is a new element that when you afflict an enemy with it, they will get a damage over time effect, and once they die with that damage over time effect in effect, they will explode, spreading that disease like a wildfire. So if you debuff them, then kill them, they spread that, then you kill more things, creating this constant explosion of radiation damage and constantly spreading it. And there are multiple classes that can increase their splash damage radius, so that way they can keep spreading it even easier. So what about the bonuses? Well, radiation doesn't actually get that many bonuses in terms of attacking things. In fact, in normal mode, you will not really get any bonuses for flesh. Normal and TVHM will have no changes in terms of extra damage. However, for shields, in normal mode, you will have no bonus, but in TVHM, you'll see a 50% damage increase for using radiation damage. And then finally, armor and radiation do not work well together. You're going to be seeing a 30% damage reduction when using radiation against armor, and a 50% damage reduction when in TVHM. And then finally, we have the final element, cryo. Cryo is an element that increases your basically ability to kill enemies by making enemies stand perfectly still. If you stack the debuff enough on them, they will slowly become slower and slower and slower until the point where they completely freeze in place and you just get to have free headshots on them to your heart's content. But what about the damage bonuses? Well, cryo isn't the end-all be-all weapon as it was in the pre-sequel. Against flesh, you will have no change at all. Using cryo will not give you any damage bonus, but it will not give you any damage reduction. Against armor, it will make armor much more brittle, meaning that you get a 20% extra damage bonus against armor, or 50% in TVHM. So cryo can actually be a very nice alternative to corrosive if you know you're going to be going into an area with not a lot of shields, but a lot of armor and maybe some health as well. So health and armor enemies, you're definitely going to focus on cryo instead of corrosive. Now, if you're going to be going up against shielded enemies, that's a whole different story. Cryo is going to be seeing a 30% damage reduction when going up against shields in normal, and 50% damage reduction when going up against shields. And that will pretty much go over all of the elements. Like I said, explosive is no longer an element and is now considered kinetic, and melee as well, as long as it's not elemental, is also considered kinetic. So feel free to take a quick gander to this little list here, as this will go over absolutely everything that you needed to know in this video. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy these deep dives into the different mechanics of the video, like I said, do me a favor and hit a like, and because there's no segue into this, use creator code rooSpy to support my content. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a nice one. See you in the next one video. Next video? Next video!